Welcome to Alpine Learning Group's Innovation in Autism Webinar Series. Alpine Learning Group offers a full range of diagnostic and applied behavior analysis, educational, and clinical services to individuals of all ages. Each year during Autism Acceptance Month, we share our expertise through free webinars and make them available to the community. At the close of the presentation, we'll share a QR code to learn about other presentations in this series. I'm Dr. Bridget Taylor, the co-founder and CEO of Alpine Learning Group. For nearly 37 years, I've had the pleasure of working alongside a group of innovative and compassionate leaders in the field of autism. I'm happy that we're able to share their expertise with you here today. Today's webinar is You've Got This, Promoting Independence and Autonomy Across the Lifespan. We are joined today by Kelly Della Rosa, who will share her expertise during today's presentation. I think she's just logged off and will log back on very shortly. Kelly is a board-certified behavior analyst at Alpine Learning Group. She earned her master's degree in applied behavior analysis from Caldwell University and has been working with learners with autism since 2008. In her current role, Kelly coordinates the agency's research and BCBA supervision program, conducts skills-based and functional behavioral assessment, and provides clinical support to staff, learners, and families. She's presented at many local and national conferences on a variety of topics, including assessing and reducing problem behavior, vocational preferences, transition to adulthood, and equivalence-based instruction. We're so grateful for her willingness to share her expertise and insights today. Now I'll turn it over to Kelly. Thank you for joining today.
Hi, everyone. First, I want to thank Bridget for that great introduction, and I want to thank everyone for attending the presentation today. This is one of my very favorite topics to talk about and areas to train staff and parents, and I'm very excited for our discussion today. So let's get started. Today, we're going to be discussing a variety of topics that I hope will be helpful for you as you prepare your learners or your children for independence. We're going to talk about why independence matters, how to identify skills to teach across the lifespan, teaching strategies that promote independence, how to identify potential barriers, and then I'd like to wrap up by talking about some practical real-life examples of how you can apply these strategies across a variety of settings. So when children are young, we, meaning both parents and professionals, we all do many things for our children, right? We help them tie their shoes, we put on their clothing, we eat their food, we brush their teeth, and we bathe them. These are just things that are part of our life when they're younger. But this is a very natural thing for us to do when they're young. But if we're not careful and we continue to do things for them without actively teaching independence, we might have a 15-year-old who can't brush their teeth, a 20-year-old who still needs help wiping after using the restroom, a 40-year-old who can't prepare their own meal, or maybe even a 70-year-old who still can't dress themselves. So these are things we need to keep in mind as we are starting to program for our learners, even at a young age. So as you're listening to this presentation, I want you to ask yourselves a few questions. First, does the learner's curriculum address skills that promote independence? Is teaching independence a priority for me? If you're a teacher, are you helping families prioritize independence? And if you're a parent, are you prioritizing independence? Do my teaching interventions promote independence? And we're going to talk a lot about this in terms of our fading strategies, maybe fading our distance as a caregiver. And have I forgotten about all the important stuff? So what do I mean by important stuff? Let's talk about that a little bit. So for example, is the learner able to point to 50 pictures in a minute, but they can't use utensils to feed himself? Can she add and subtract, but can't start the zipper on her coat? Can she describe pictures in a full sentence, but can't use the bathroom independently? Can he tell you the difference between an airplane and a bird, but can't brush his teeth independently? Of course, all these academic and language goals are very important as well and should be included in a learner's curriculum. But you have to make sure we're not missing out on the important independent living skills as well. So what does it mean to be independent? There's not just one thing that makes someone independent. There's a lot of different components that I'd love to discuss today. First, the most basic is, do they perform the response without assistance or most importantly, without reminders. I know sometimes we feel the need to remind people a lot about the things that they're doing, but if we didn't do that, would they complete the skill? Can they perform the response without adult supervision? So if we don't fade our presence and we're in the room every time our child's brushing the teeth, next time I'm not there, are they going to do it the right way? Can they perform the response without engaging in off-task behavior, such as disruptive behavior or other safety compromising behavior? And most importantly, independent responding maintains over time. So something I teach my learner today, I want them to be able to do it 5 years from now. There are so many reasons why independence is so important and why it's often a goal of a learner's educational programming, and it should be part of their home programming as well. First, independence helps reduce reliance on adults. When learners are able to complete tasks on their own, they build confidence and they really begin to rely on their own abilities rather than depending on somebody who can give them the constant support that they're looking for. It also reduces the need for increased teaching ratios. When learners can work independently, educators are able to support more students effectively and create a more balanced and manageable learning environment. Not every learning environment is lucky enough to have a teacher for every student like we do at Alpine, or maybe some of the parents that are on today have multiple children. So you're going to need some of your children to start working more independently. Some learners enjoy or seem to enjoy working without supervision. It gives them a sense of control and responsibility over their own learning, which can increase motivation and engagement. Independence is also more age appropriate. As learners grow, it's important that their level of independence and autonomy grows with them, helping them prepare for real world situations. Another key benefit is that increases opportunity for a less restrictive environment. So, here in our Alpine education program, we have a 1-to-1 staff to student ratio, but as they get older, we aren't going to have that luxury anymore. We need to prepare students to work with less support available to them. Learners who demonstrate independence can access more flexible and inclusive settings, which supports both their academic and their social development. Additionally, working independently doesn't mean working alone. Learners also develop the ability to work with peers. They can build communication, teamwork, and problem-solving skills. Like at Alpine, I don't work on my own. I'm independent with a lot of my tasks, but I have a whole team behind me, so I need to be able to work independently and in the presence of my peers. And also, what we want to think about is that independence really leads to more opportunities. I really want to just hammer this home is that the more independence your child or the learner that you're working with has, it's going to truly open doors to so many social, leisure, housing, and vocational opportunities. Some of you might be working with young children, but it's not too early to start thinking about what are the things that they're going to be doing when they're an adult, because most of us are adults for the majority of our lives. Promoting independence for people with autism can also lead to an improved quality life. And I think this is a very important thing to consider as we're working with children and adults with autism is that we want to think about the sense of control that they have over their lives. Because think of the sense of control you have over your own life. You have the ability to make choices, have routines, and communicate your wants and needs, and that supports your overall happiness. People with autism deserve the same opportunities to experience fulfillment and joy in their lives. Independence is truly a lifelong process, and steps can be taken along the way to ensure that our children and adult learners can be the most independent adults possible. It's never too early and never too late to start working on independence. When you're thinking about what skills to teach your learner, that will lead to the most independence. The most important place to start is simple. What matters most to the learner and their family? Their priorities, values, their goals should guide every decision that we make. This ensures that any program or support that we put in place is meaningful, relevant, and truly beneficial. It should always start with the learner and the family. To better understand a learner's development, we can also refer to resources like the CDC, which provides helpful information about developmental norms. These benchmarks can give us a general idea of expected skills across different areas. And not saying that they're going to be able to do everything, but it will give you a sense of what should a 5-year-old be able to do? What should a 10-year-old be able to do? There's also a really great app that the CDC has that breaks it down by age group. So that's always something that I think is helpful for people to reference while they're developing goals. From there, we can use standard assessment protocols to create individualized programs tailored to each learner's needs because we want it to be individualized and not every learner is going to be the same. There's lots of examples out there, and I'm sure some of you have seen different assessments than I'm going to touch on today, but here are some of the ones that we've used to develop goals focused mostly on independence. So one example is the Vineland-3 Adaptive Behavior Scales. This assessment focuses on adaptive functioning, including functional communication, daily living skills, socialization, motor skills. It really helps us get a snapshot of how the learner is managing their everyday life. Another important tool is the ABLES. This looks at basic learning skills such as cooperation, social interaction, requesting, as well as academic skills, self-help skills, and motor skills. So it gives you a little bit more than what we would get with a Vineland. And then as learners move into adulthood, we might look at some different types of skills. So here we tend to use the assessment of functional living skills, or AFLS. This assessment is divided into several modules, including basic living skills, community skills, independent living skills, and even there's a vocational skills assessment, which looks at job skills and areas that a learner might want to work in. By starting with what matters most to the learner and their family and combining that with structured evidence-based assessments, we can build individualized programs that truly support growth, independence, and quality of life. So beyond formal assessments, it's often helpful to really just take the time to analyze our own behavior and see what we're doing for our children or our students every day. So you might want to ask yourself, do you still dress her? Are you putting the straw in their juice box? Are you zippering or buttoning their clothing? Do you tie their shoes every day before school? If the answer is yes, they can complete these skills, that's great. But what I want you to think about next is, can they do this without your presence? So if you tell your child to go pack their backpack and you're in a different room, will they do it? Or do they need you in the room to complete that task? Or even more importantly, is the task being done thoroughly? So you ask them to brush their teeth and then you check and you still see that there's some food from breakfast. Maybe they aren't as independent as we think they are. These are all components that we should consider. So what I want to do in the next few minutes is discuss some of the skill areas we might consider when programming for independence with younger learners. Keep in mind, this is not a full set of curriculum guidelines. This is just some of the things we want to think about that might impact our child's independence as they get older. So I really love this quote from Peter Gerhardt and Sheena Berry's book, Make It Meaningful. And he said, adulthood begins in preschool. So I'm sure that most of us, most parents aren't thinking about adulthood when their child's 3 or 4, but independence can truly start early. Skills needed later in life should be introduced early in programming, especially some learners take a little bit of time to master something. So why not start now and just have them do components of a skill? While goals may vary depending on your child or their skill level, focusing on these areas early helps plan the future that you envision for your child or your learner. So let's start by talking about communication. If we want our children to be independent, they need a voice. We can start by teaching them to request their wants, their needs. This might include asking for preferred items, requesting for someone to stop an unpreferred activity, maybe tickling or pushing on a swing is a good place to start, or requesting assistance, right? Because we can't plan for everything that they're going to encounter in their life, but we can teach them to ask for clarification or ask for help if they're unsure what's expected of them. While some students may be non-vocal and don't talk, it's critical that we find a communication modality that works for them. That might include augmentative communication, sign language, leading you to the item initially, but they need to be able to speak to us and communicate in their way. Some areas of focus for socialization might include requesting attention, initiating conversation, or even engaging in pretend play, which might give them access to more social situations that are more complex later in life. Self-care instruction can also lead to lots of independence, and I think most importantly, leading to learners requiring less caregiver presence in private spaces. So, when a child is 5 or 6, they might have a caregiver in the room with them when they're doing some of these self-care routines, but it's not really appropriate anymore when they're 20 and they have to have somebody in the room with them. They should have some privacy. So it's never too early to start working on independent toothbrushing, toileting, dressing, and appropriate behavior at meal times. Young children may still need our help, and that's okay, but there's lots of ways to shape independence. For example, maybe if you're working on toothbrushing, you might put the toothpaste on, but then the child is learning to brush independently. And then over time, we can shape more independence. So think about all the skills that are required to maintain your safety in the community. I don't think it's something we reflect on enough because it's a lot being an adult in the community and thinking about, oh, is a car coming when we're getting out of the parking lot? What are the things that are going to happen? What if somebody approaches me? So these are also things we can really start to teach now, not just for safety, but so that our learners and our children can be as independent as possible. So, for example, when we break down what it takes to go out grocery shopping, you would likely find many skills that we could teach our young learners now. So, for example, we might teach responding to stop or come here, super important safety skill, so that they can be independent, staying with an adult while they're younger, avoiding obstacles, not running into people, declining inappropriate instruction from a stranger. It's not something we like to think about, but if somebody came up to your child and asked them to come with them, what would they do? Many people also say that the job of childhood is play, and I agree. So we owe it to our learners to teach them play skills so that they can be independent during their free time and hopefully independent in playing with their peers, which might open up more opportunities. This can start by teaching skills such as completing independent activity schedules, which we'll talk about a lot later, playing board games, playing on the playground, taking turns, cooperating with losing, all these things that will make it easier for our children to engage with others and have some free time filled with fun activities. In regard to self-management, we can start teaching learners to cope with situations in their environment that are beyond their control, which it's going to happen. That's life. Unexpected events happen all the time throughout our lives, and learners are going to be given more opportunities if they can learn to tolerate denied access, tolerate termination of preferred items or activities. Maybe we teach them to request breaks or advocate for themselves or cooperate with changes in routine. These are all ways we can prep them to be more independent. So, as we all know, the majority of our children's lives are going to be spent in adulthood. Being independent as an adult requires lots of skills that we can plan and teach early on. So, let's take a look at some of the things that might come up in that adolescence and adulthood stage. So, I really like this table. It's a great visual of how self-care skills might shift as a learner ages, but this really could apply to any domain. So, as your child or your student gets older, goals are going to shift as you prepare them for adulthood. While we won't abandon goals that we're working on before, adjustments are often made to continue working on independence. The skill areas that we discussed just a couple minutes ago will likely still apply. We just might switch our focus. So, for example, at age 6, we might be teaching a learner to help out with some chores at home, and maybe they place their dirty dish in the sink after mealtime. So that's how they're helping at 6. But then at age 12, that same learner might now be working to load the dishwasher. So similar goals, but we're going to expand the complexity based on the learner's age and their skill level. Our community goals also might shift as learners age and focus more on independent performance, including waiting by a car after exiting a vehicle, exchanging an emergency card if lost. I'm going to show you an example of this later. Purchasing items in the community, responding to community helpers. So knowing, I said before that they don't want to respond to a stranger, but to them, a community helper might seem like a stranger if we don't teach them that a community helper is there to help and what that means. Is it a police officer, a store employee? Or even arranging transportation. I'm going to share some interesting things that we're doing at Alpine later, but part of being an adult is knowing how you're going to get places. And so those are things we should think about. If they're not going to drive, how will they get where they need to go? Self-care goals should also focus on preparing learners to be as independent as possible. So less assistance, like I said before, and I'm going to say it again, is required in private spaces like bathrooms or bedrooms. So, this might include showering, changing independently, using a restroom, unsupervised, again, that unsupervised piece, freshening up after physical activity. Maybe they go to the gym and they need to learn how to clean up afterwards. So those are just some small examples. There's plenty more out there depending on the needs of your child. So unfortunately for all of us who are now adults, being independent means chores. We have lots of things to do as adults constantly. And think about all the things that are going on in your head. Oh, I have to wash the sheets. I need to dust. I need to do all these things. Wouldn't it be great if we start having our learners contribute now to the household that they're in, right? As they get older. So completing chores, washing and folding their own clothing, keeping shared spaces clean, preparing meals and snacks. These are all things that we can start teaching our learners now. In the United States, only about 14% of autistic adults work full-time jobs. That's a very low number, and I'd love to see that continue to creep up. And we're working hard at Alpine to give lots of meaningful opportunities to learners in the community at job sites. And we can all start working on that by creating meaningful pre-vocational and job sampling opportunities, which can open the door to employment opportunities throughout their life. So vocational skills can start at home or at school. You can teach things such as pre-vocational skills. Maybe you work on cleaning, stocking shelves, entering information on a computer, working with others cooperatively. Again, that piece where even if they're independent, they might have to work with other people, right? I don't think there are many jobs in this world where they're not going to have to encounter other people and work cooperatively. Interpersonal skills, so being able to go to an interview or compromising, maybe negotiating terms. Job specific skills at various work sites is another one. So, doing some job sampling. We want to know, what does a learner like and what are they good at? It's important that we have both of those pieces in place. Most adults have hobbies or activities that they enjoy in their free time. So we might not all have the same amount of time to do them, but that brings joy to our life, right? We should continue to help learners with autism access activities that bring them joy too. So this might include engaging in special interests or hobbies, engaging in interactive leisure activities with others. So maybe playing video games like Nintendo Switch or playing card games. It can be as simple or as complex as you want it to be. And then engaging in solitary leisure activities for at least 15 minutes without direct supervision. So this particular skill can prepare learners for less restrictive environments and adult services. So think about your own free time, right? There's not somebody watching you and what you're doing all the time. So we want to prepare learners for reduced ratios. Maybe there's 5 learners and only 1 staff. And if they can't work independently for 15 minutes on a leisure skill, that's going to make it harder for them to access those types of environments. Finally, it's important to continue working on reducing safety compromising behavior and the number of motivational systems that you have in place. So token boards, DRO systems, all of those behavior plans, we're going to work to reduce them as they get older, because if a caregiver is required to implement these plans and systems, some of the independence for our learners can be limited. Okay. So now that we touched on what skills to teach, let's move into discussing how to teach them in a way that maximizes independence for each of our learners. So before we get into formal teaching strategies, I want to review some of the general ways that we can promote independence in learners every day. First, it's important to monitor your own behavior. Ask yourself, are you doing things for your child or your learner that they could be doing themselves? We are all guilty of this, and there's lots of reasons for it. Maybe we're in a rush. Maybe we just want it done, and we don't have the time. It can be easy to step in and help, but too much assistance can actually limit opportunities to practice independence. Instead, what we want to do is guide the learner to perform that response. Rather than completing the task for them, support them in doing it on their own. This can help them build both the skill and their confidence. As learners begin to succeed, you're going to fade that assistance as soon as possible. Get in and get out. The goal is always to move toward independence, so gradually reduce the level of support that you provide. It's also helpful to avoid relying on verbal prompts or repeated reminders. These can become difficult to fade and might lead to prompt dependence. Instead, we want to use strategies like physical prompts or visual schedules, which can be reduced more systematically over time. And we're going to talk more about those in depth. Okay. So as most of you know, there are many different types of prompts or assistance that we can provide to help learners acquire a new skill. So we might use physical, verbal, gesture, model, textual, positional. There's so many out there. Generally, when we're teaching an independent skill, we might use a physical or a gesture prompt so that we can fade quickly. It's crucial that we also identify a prompt fading strategy. So once you know what your prompt is, we should also know how are we going to get rid of that prompt so that the behavior is being maintained by the natural cue in the environment. So prompt fading refers to gradually removing all assistance and transferring stimulus control from the prompt to the natural antecedent stimuli or cue in the environment. It's important to know what should cue the response to the environment. So for example, flushing the toilet should serve as the cue to then wash your hands after going to the bathroom. It shouldn't be a caregiver prompting the child to wash their hands that controls that behavior. And if it is, we might want to go back and reteach it. So we also want to know here, how does your child learn best? Some learners benefit from errorless teaching, where we provide assistance or prompts immediately, while others do best when they're given a chance to try on their own and we gradually introduce assistance. So it's best that you know how your child learns best. Differential reinforcement is also an important part of the prompt fading procedure. This is a teaching procedure in which reinforcement is applied to one member of a response class and not to other members. So, for example, you provide a token or a small snack each time your child ties their shoes, but you're not going to provide reinforcement if your child did not tie their shoes or you had to provide a high level of assistance. Differential reinforcement should also be applied by reinforcing responses demonstrated with the lowest level of assistance. So, for example, if a learner is working on cutting a sandwich, a parent might provide more reinforcement for cutting the sandwich without any assistance, but less reinforcement if the parent had to provide any type of prompting. By reserving the best reinforcement for the most independent responses, we can reduce or even prevent prompt dependency. So let's talk about what that means. Sometimes learners that we work with have challenges with fading prompts and find that learners become dependent on those prompts. So prompt dependency is a common challenge for learners with autism. We see it a lot. You may start to notice that your child waits for you to give a verbal reminder, or their performance is inconsistent once you have faded those prompts. Or sometimes a learner will stand around and wait for you to come back if you left the room when you told them to do something. These are all signs of prompt dependency and could impede on their independence. Really, this is not the learner's challenge. There's something going on with our teaching. So really it's our issue that they're not so much prompt dependency, it's we didn't do a good job with fading our prompts. So really it's a failure for us to transfer stimulus control from the supplemental cues or the prompt to the natural cue in the environment. So here's another good example. Instead of a dirty plate serving as a cue for a learner to put it in the dishwasher, a parent uses a verbal prompt and says, put your dish in the sink. And that might start to control the response of cleaning up. So if the parent was in the room, it's unlikely that learner is going to put that dish in the sink. So we want to make sure that we have a clear prompt fading procedure and fade to the natural SD so we can avoid this prompt dependency. We might not be able to remove all prompts and cues, and that's something I would really like to focus on, and that's okay. I use to-do lists every day. I use sticky notes with reminders. I have things written all over to remind myself of the things that I need to do and what the expectations are. A student might still need those types of cues as well, and it's okay if they still need to schedule, text prompt, alarm, or cue. What we want to think about is how do we make those discrete and make them so that they're less stigmatizing. So we might use technology such as motivators, which you see on the left there. It's a vibrating pager, iPads, or alarms. Those are just a few suggestions. Or you can even have a peer provide the prompts as opposed to the adult that's in the room. These are all some ways that we can really promote independence without taking away all their supports. Here's a couple examples. So these are examples of cues used to teach learners to follow appointments. So you can simply type out the appointments like you see on the left, or you could write them on a whiteboard or program them right into a learner's device with alarm reminders. I do this for myself all the time. So this is helpful. So you're promoting, they're not independent with setting the timers or putting the alarms in the phone, and that's okay. We set those up, but then the rest of the day, they may be more independent with following through on some of their tasks. And that reduces the need for a caregiver to go do something else while their child is getting things done. And most of us use systems like this for ourselves. So think about the planners, the calendars that you use in your own life, and you can adapt them for use with your child. And that's often a good place to start. A new favorite strategy of mine is to use technology to promote independence. So most of us probably have smartphones or smart devices in our homes, and you can use them to create reminders or set timers. I use this strategy in my own home all the time, and it seems that many children would prefer being reminded to clean up by Alexa instead of by an adult. So I think this is a nice use of technology and kind of removing yourself from the picture. So we mentioned activity schedules earlier, so let's talk about it. So we constantly are thinking about how do we promote independence? One of the ways that has been well researched is the use of activity schedules. And an activity schedule is any schedule with a list of tasks to be completed. It could be in a lot of different formats. It could be pictures and text. It could be in electronics. It could be on an iPad or written. Any way that works for the child is fine. McClanahan and Krantz suggest that these types of schedules can facilitate the completion of lengthy response chains and independent transitions from one activity to the next. You see a lot of these in home programs, a lot in school programs, and they're really beneficial for several reasons. So let's talk about why. The first being that stimulus control can be transferred from an adult to a picture. This can possibly lead to a decrease in prompt dependency because the adult is not needed in the room. Activity schedules are also portable. Learners can take them to various settings, including in the community, to relatives' home, grandma and grandpa's house, during a family visit, or even to job sites. Teaching learners at a young age to use activity schedules can prepare them to use a variety of schedule types as they move into adulthood. And after learners master following an activity schedule, the benefits are clear for everybody. So staffing ratios can be reduced and the learner might require less supervision. So it's good all around. So what type of schedule should you use? So this is a really nice visual from the Parent Training for Disruptive Behaviors Parent Workbook by Bears and colleagues. If you're unsure of what type of schedule to use with your learner, this is a nice little visual and a good place to start. So as you can see, the authors break it down by schedule type. So object, icon, photo, sight word, and then they give guidance on what are the prerequisites required for each type. So this is a nice place to say, what should I use for my learner based on their skill set at this time? So here are some basic examples of activity schedules. On the left, you'll see a text schedule for going shopping. That was just made on the Notes app on an iPhone. Very basic, simple, portable, and it's very easy to edit. Not a lot of material prep involved for caregivers. Text and picture schedule in the middle for dressing and completing a morning routine. And then on the right, you see an iPad schedule for teaching hand washing. This particular schedule has an audio prompt built in where an audio cue is delivered to the learner when they tap the picture. So it will tell them the instruction when they hit the picture, which is nice. You can also build in a countdown. So if you want them to wash their hands for 20 seconds, you could build that in too. Oops, sorry about that. Oh, there we go. Okay. Here's a choice schedule for a learner who is being taught to independently access apps on the iPad. They're given a board with a variety of pictures and apps. They select the app for the game that they want to play, and then they set the timer for the time that's given there. I really like this because it encourages learners to not only make choices, but it ensures that they're accessing a variety of apps and it keeps them on track. So they're not just playing one game the entire time that they're on the iPad or watching YouTube the entire time. Some learners need schedules in the community to increase their independence, and that's okay too. This text and picture schedule is used to teach a learner to order food with an order card. While this learner's non-vocal, we were able to give him access to opportunities in the community because of the visual schedule and the order card that he was taught to use. So they no longer have to rely on a caregiver to order for him. He was taught in simulated sessions at school to order using that card, and then he generalized it in the community at Starbucks to order a cake pop. Schedules should not only match the learner's skill level, but be as portable as possible. So here's a nice example. This is a text schedule that's on a lanyard that a learner wears while they're completing pre-vocational skills, such as recycling, stocking items, replenishing items. This strategy is great for independence because it ensures that the schedule is never left behind, especially if they're moving around a building. Another effective way to build independence is through incidental teaching, using natural, everyday moments to create learning opportunities. This means both capturing opportunities as they happen and at times contriving situations that encourage the learner to respond more independently. So a helpful habit is to pause before doing something for the learner and ask yourself, is this a moment I can teach instead? Small, everyday tasks can become powerful learning opportunities when we give the learner the chance to participate. You can also involve learners in tasks that you already need to complete. So it's kind of a win-win situation, whether it's cleaning up, organizing materials, preparing something simple. These shared activities can provide meaningful opportunities to practice independence. And most importantly, we want to make sure that we're teaching learners when they're motivated. When they're interested or engaged, they're far more likely to participate, learn, and access opportunities for reinforcement. Now that we discussed how to teach, I want to take some time to consider how we ensure skills maintain once adult supervision is removed. So, the end goal for our child is to complete the task independently. That means without adult supervision. So think about your own job or your responsibilities at home. You don't have someone there watching what you're doing every second, and you're expected to still complete the task anyway and at a high level. By systematically fading your distance and presence, you are ensuring that your child or your student can complete the task independently, and you're preparing them for a more complex opportunity in the future where there's less support. So let's talk about some suggestions for fading. So first, you might think about how you can fade systematically. So we don't want to go right from being right next to them to being completely out of the room. We want to have some intermediary steps where maybe you're directly behind, and then maybe you fade 5 feet behind, you're looking busy across the room, and then you're finally out of view. Also want to make sure that we thin schedules of reinforcement. If they're used to getting a reinforcer or a token every 2 to 3 responses, it's going to be very difficult for you to get out of the room. So you want to start to slowly thin those schedules of reinforcement. You also can use intermittent schedules of supervision. This is a really great way of keeping them on task because they never know when you might pop in, right? So you might pop in on a variable schedule, or maybe initially every 5 minutes you pop in, or then it's every 30 minutes, and they're never going to know when you're going to pop in. So they're going to maintain their on-task behavior, hopefully. You could also use remote or video supervision when possible. So with all the technology today, you could either have a camera in your home or, in our school, we have lots of systems to make sure that people are safe, but they can still have an opportunity to practice independence. We can also embed reinforcement. And this is one of my favorite ways to promote independence and really fade adult presence and support. So let's talk about what that means. When reinforcement is embedded, students provide reinforcement to themselves upon completion of a predetermined amount of tasks. So for example, maybe it's every other page of an activity schedule, they take a token or there's an edible. Some ways to embed reinforcement or incorporate edibles is a very beginner strategy. You might put it directly into the schedule. So in the example on the screen, the task to complete is on one page. And then when the learner turns the page, there's an edible in a baggie on the next page. These are a little bit more complex now. So this next example shows a simple text schedule with token reinforcement built in. So we faded out the edibles. Once the learner completes each task, they move that colored token to the bottom of the page. Once they have all 3 tokens, then they can access the reinforcer. In the next example, this is an iPad schedule, and we can still embed reinforcement, but we just took a picture of their token and put it in the schedule. And then the student will point to the token on the screen and then go to their token board and get a token and then move it down into the appropriate place. Although it may be necessary to use edibles to initially teach a skill, the goal is to fade edibles out and to use more natural reinforcement, and also thinking about how to delay the time that the reinforcement is delivered. So you might thin out that schedule. So think about your own routines and expectations you set for yourself. So you might have a to-do list, and when you're done with it, you're going to sit down and treat yourself to a coffee and you're going to read a chapter in your book. So we might keep those things in mind for our learners that maybe over time they complete a full task before they get any reinforcement. But initially, we might need to start in small pieces. So not only is independence a goal, but we should also consider the impact of independence on autonomy. Autonomy refers to the ability to make choices and direct the course of your own life. All of us here likely have a considerable level of autonomy. The more independent skills that a learner has, the more autonomy that they're going to have as well. So how are we going to incorporate this into our everyday lives here? So there are many ways to do this across settings. First, we talked about this already, but it's even more important with autonomy is making sure they have a voice. So start by ensuring that your child or learner has a reliable way to communicate. This could be verbal speech, an AAC device, picture exchange, sign language, gestures, leading you to where they need to go. The key is that communication is functional, meaning it allows them to independently express their wants and needs. And if a learner does not yet have this skill, that's something that we should explicitly teach and consistently reinforce across settings. Support autonomy by honoring communication requests. So when a learner makes a choice or communicates a need, honor it whenever possible. I know sometimes we can't do that, but this really reinforces that their communication is valued and it's effective. So we don't want to randomly reinforce when they request for things, because then they're never going to know, am I going to be valued here when I'm talking? So we want to initially really reinforce every opportunity for them to use their communication modality. Prompt is needed, of course, but aim to fade prompts over time so the individual becomes more independent in communicating with you. You can also build autonomy by embedding choices into everyday routines. So within activity choices, you might offer simple options, such as choosing between two activities maybe at first. This helps learners practice decision-making without becoming too overwhelmed. You could also do it within work or task order. So you could allow individuals to choose the sequence of tasks. So maybe at school, you ask them, do you want to do your reading activity first, or do you want to do your math lesson first? And even small choices within their materials, like selecting a color, a tool, or item to use during programming, can promote a sense of control and personal preference. And does it matter if they use the yellow pencil or the orange pencil that they selected? Probably not. So if that helps promote their autonomy, that's a good opportunity to do that. Evaluate preferences frequently, either informally or formally. Continuously observe and assess preferences. What brings the learner joy? What do they avoid? Look at engagement levels, repeated selections, and indices of happiness. Maybe things like, do they smile? Do they approach you or objects? Do they show excitement when you're doing certain activities? Collecting simple data or notes can help you identify these patterns. And also remember, preferences change, right? I don't like the same things that maybe were my favorite 5 years ago. So it's important to regularly assess preference and keep choices motivating and relevant. Remember, autonomy really develops when individuals are given consistent opportunities to communicate, make choices, and have those choices respected. Oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Okay, so here are some samples of choice schedules we use at Alpine. On the left is a daily schedule that allows the student to make some decisions about the order of programs they work on. While some parts of the day are non-negotiable, like lunchtime, group lesson time, other programs can be taught in any order, and it really doesn't matter as long as they're learning. Allowing learners to make choices in this way is really a good place to start in promoting autonomy. On the right is a leisure schedule or an activity schedule whose order is completely decided by the learner. A key part of promoting autonomy is encouraging self-advocacy, so helping individuals communicate what they want, need, or don't want. During our own daily routines, there's lots of situations that might require us to advocate for ourselves. So something as simple as speaking up to correct a coffee order to more challenging scenarios, our learners can be taught to do the same. We can start small. Maybe you teach them to say stop if they don't like something, or even teach them to ask for a break. Another important concept is assent. And there's a growing body of literature out there on applying assent in behavior analysis. And this really refers to an individual's agreement or willingness to participate in an activity. Just as important is assent withdrawal, or when someone indicates that they're no longer wanting to participate. So we can recognize assent and its withdrawal in several ways. Maybe verbal statements, they tell you, body orientation, they're turning away from you, or turning towards you, facial expressions, signs of comfort, distress, or maybe hesitant, approach or non-approach behaviors, moving toward or avoiding an activity or person. By paying attention to these cues, we can adjust our teaching strategies, including prompting and reinforcement, to be respectful of the learner's voice and autonomy. Let's shift now to discuss what barriers are present to independence, what ones are there, and how to address them. So keep in mind, these are some just examples of possible solutions. There might be different ones depending on the learners that you work with or what your child needs. So first, response effort. The task might be too daunting or overwhelming for the learner. We can address this barrier by adapting that task and increasing the complexity over time. So for example, if a learner is being taught to purchase items in the community, consider teaching them to use a credit card rather than counting out money. That's going to reduce that effort and make it more likely that they'll be independent. Second, you may observe that prompting a response leads to disruptive behavior. An example solution here would be to adjust your prompting strategy. Maybe they're hesitant about being physically prompted. So let's be mindful of that. Maybe you assess that and then you adjust your prompting strategy to use a video model or an in-person model or a gesture. Third, you might start to notice that your child or learner is waiting for your prompt and you suspect there is a level of prompt dependency. Here you want to take a look at your teaching procedures and carefully plan for fading prompts and thinning your schedule of reinforcement. If you find yourself getting stuck, think about what in the environment should naturally cue the behavior and work towards fading that to that stimulus. Additionally, you can consider using activity schedules like we talked about and embedding reinforcement within those schedules. Sometimes you just need a skill completed quickly, right? In that moment, you need it done, and it's not time to promote independence. So that's okay. It happens. Schedule additional teaching opportunities in that case. So make sure that you find time to practice and give the learners opportunities to learn when you're not rushed. Another barrier can sometimes be our own bias. So we simply have low expectations. So here, I think it's really important that we don't assume what the child can or cannot do. Let them try first. Collect baseline data. Just observe what they can do on their own before deciding what you need to teach, or deciding to go in and help them without even assessing it. Finally, sometimes our teaching environments are not set up to promote independence. So a possible solution here is assess the environment and ask yourself, does my child know where items are located? Do they know what the expectations are? Are things organized? If not, a good place to start is creating organizational systems. Maybe you label materials and create schedules. Okay, so now that we've reviewed strategies for promoting independence, let's see how these are applied in real world context. And I know we're moving towards the end of our time here, so I'm going to jump right in. So independence often grows from simple routines that learners get to practice every day. Dressing independently is one of those. So dressing is an important daily living skill. And with patience and practice, many learners can become very independent over time. As learners build independence with dressing, it can support privacy and dignity. So it's daily routines like this that can make smoother transitions for caregivers. It might require less hands-on assistance, and it gives a parent time to focus on other things that they need to get done. So let's take a look at what are some things that we've done to make this process smoother. So first, start by reducing response effort, and then gradually build up independence one step at a time. Here's our few ways to do that. So maybe you identify a complete outfit for your child or learner, maybe the night before, or maybe the weekend before, and you set them out for the whole week in one of these little organizers like you see on the screen, and then they already know what they're wearing and then they can get dressed. You've removed the element of having to pick out the clothes, which is pretty daunting for some learners. We could also use visual cues. So for example, we might put a visual on the shoes to indicate which one is the left and the right shoe so that you don't have to be involved. Or maybe you pick clothing that fits your child's needs. So elastic waistbands, Velcro instead of laces if they haven't learned how to tie their shoes yet. Just like with other skills, visual schedules are super helpful here, and timers can also make things more predictable. So you could teach your child to get dressed within a certain time frame, and you could give them a timer to indicate that. Most importantly, we want to make sure that we're celebrating wins, right? Progress adds up, and consistent practice can help independence grow over time. Okay, so independence can also be promoted within simple routines such as unpacking a backpack. Here's a few examples. So here at Alpine, each learner has their own locker. We start by putting an individualized schedule like the ones you see on the screen inside the locker and teach the learner to follow that schedule to unpack on their own. Over time, steps are faded and a schedule might not even be needed anymore. Or in the case of the cue on the right, some learners just need a reminder to close their locker. So that's all that exists in that locker. It's private, nobody knows it's there, and they're working independently. Okay, here's a nice example of a very simple token tracking system that a learner uses while walking laps. They really enjoy walking rather than being on a treadmill. So to enhance their independence and really support that choice. The learner was taught to move a token down following each lap that they complete so they can walk independently. You'll notice that there's also a text cue that says, "Hi, would you like to walk with me?" This was included so that the learner can request to walk with a partner should they choose. Another great way to promote independence is to pair learners who have complementary skill sets. For example, if a learner has difficulty completing fine motor tasks, maybe you pair them with a learner who can complete those parts of the tasks while the first learner does something else. So in the example on the screen, learners were taught to complete vocational tasks simultaneously in a cooperative manner by following a shared single activity schedule. The schedules were laminated and the learners used dry erase markers and they would cross off each step after they read it before they started it so that not both learners would be doing the same thing at once. These methods can also be used for teaching two learners simultaneously, allowing for reduced staffing ratios. So it's a really helpful strategy, and they can collaborate with their peers. You can adapt this method using other materials such as apps on iPads or other devices. We've had a great deal of success using apps such as First Then and Pictello. As learners age, we often work to reduce the number of motivational systems in place. So this is a really nice system that some of our adult learners are using. It's called the Privilege Points app. It allows learners to choose what tasks they complete and get a designated number of points once a task is completed. The learners can then redeem those points for a reinforcer. But what's nice here is they can choose what tasks they're going to complete based on the point value, and it really gives them some autonomy and decision-making throughout their day. What's nice about this too is that can be programmed not only for home or school goals, but home as well. And parents, caregivers, and teachers can all have access. As we provide more opportunities in the community, there's going to be a lot of skills that come up in regards to promoting safety and making sure that students are not only independent, but being safe at the same time. So for example, as we fade staff and caregiver proximity, we want to make sure that learners don't just leave an area without telling anybody. So a simple cue like the one you see on the screen can really promote that type of behavior. So they would have to go up and find an adult and say, "Can I go outside?" Learners can also be taught to exchange an information card if they're lost. So maybe they're very independent out in the community, but they got lost and they don't know where they are. They can go up to a community helper and maybe somebody that they're familiar with and exchange that information card. And of course, that would be filled out with their individualized information. Self-monitoring also can be helpful. It teaches the learner to observe and evaluate their own behavior or performance in real time. So this is nice for several reasons. First, it reduces reliance on constant adult prompting. Instead of a teacher or caregiver reminding the learner to stay on task or follow steps, the learner uses a structured tool such as a checklist, a visual cue, or app to guide themselves through expectations. Second, it strengthens self-awareness. So many learners with autism benefit from systems that help them recognize what they're doing versus what is expected of them. And over time, that kind of builds more appropriate behavior patterns. And third, it supports skill generalization because we can bring these systems into a lot of different locations, and it allows learners to apply skills more consistently without needing direct supervision. Transportation, I alluded to this earlier, but transportation can be a barrier for many individuals with autism to access both their communities for social outings and job sites for employment. This can hinder their ability to become as independent as possible. So in a research study here at Alpine, staff used multiple baseline design across responses to evaluate the use of behavioral skills training to teach 3 adults with autism to use rideshare apps for transportation and to engage in the safety skills needed to do so. So they were taught to order the ride and then track the ride progress, ask clarifying questions, refrain from sharing personal information, all the things they would need to do to successfully use an Uber or a rideshare app. And what's cool about that, before I move on, is that those learners that were taught that are still using it today to access their job sites. Another unique application of independent activity schedules is the use of QR codes. So in our work-based learning program, several learners do not carry schedules with them. Instead, they were taught to scan a QR code like the one you see, and that brings them to a schedule within Google Docs. This is what it looks like. Once they're in Google Docs, they can swipe through. They can then follow the schedule right on their device, and it eliminates the possibility of forgetting important schedules. And it allows staff to quickly update schedules without having to print materials, laminate, use Velcro. This example is was used for a learner who was shredding, oh, not shredding, I'm sorry, scanning documents. So this was a really helpful format for this particular learner, so they didn't have to carry the schedule with them. So as we're winding down on our time together, let's review some key points. So first, independence does not develop on its own. It has to be intentionally taught and supported over time. This process should start early and continue to be built across the lifespan, with expectations and supports evolving as the individual grows. Key strategy is to let your child try it first. Giving the learner an opportunity to attempt the task before stepping in can really promote problem solving and skill development. Independence can also be increased by thoughtfully arranging the environment. This includes things like organizing materials and spaces in ways that makes them more accessible. Build consistent routines. This helps learners predict expectations and complete tasks with less support over time. Offer meaningful choices throughout the day to encourage decision-making and self-advocacy. And it's also important to encourage problem solving rather than immediately providing solutions, allowing the learner to develop persistence and flexibility. As skills improve, adults should gradually fade their assistance. We talked a lot about that, and reduce proximity. We want to shift support from direct help to more distant monitoring. And finally, we want to make sure that we provide frequent and repeated opportunities to practice skills that are essential for independence to become consistent and long-lasting. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. Truly appreciate your time and attention. I hope you found the presentation helpful and that it provided some useful takeaways so you can apply them moving forward. Here are some references, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Taylor.
Thanks so much, Kelly. That was great. Lots of wonderful ideas, practical suggestions. We do have time for a few questions. If anybody would like to write the questions in the chat, I'm happy to propose them to Kelly. Anybody have any questions? So we do not have any questions, but thank you so much for joining today. I really appreciate it. Kelly, if you want to advance to the next slide, thank you so much.
Sure.
If we just wanted to provide a little, just a brief slide here with all of our services that we provide. If you know somebody looking for autism services, you can please feel free to reach out at the phone number below for our intake coordinator. And thank you for being here. This is the last webinar in our 4-part series for Autism Awareness Month. This is the QR code that will take you to the announcement with all of our other webinars that you can access. This one should be posted in the next few days. You will receive an email after this presentation with a recording and a brief participant survey. We're always looking for topics for us to present next year. We greatly appreciate your feedback so that we can continue to provide information that's of value to you and your family. Thank you so much for joining today, and have a wonderful afternoon.